You're listening to the Just Japan podcast. Everything you want to know about Japan.
Hey there, everyone, and welcome to episode number 221 of the Just Japan podcast. My name's Kevin O'Shea, and I am your host. It's been a while. Hisashibari. Back with another episode. The last 3 episodes were coming out basically one episode a month, maybe the last 4 episodes. And I do apologize. I'll be back with a little more frequency, at least during the summer holidays. I am an international school teacher, and I'm now on summer break, so I do have some more time to focus on the Just Japan podcast. I hope you guys are doing well. I'm excited. In this episode, coming back on the podcast, good friend of the Just Japan podcast, Brian Waters returns. That's right, Brian in Fukuoka at My2Yen on Twitter. That's right, Brian was on many episodes in the original run of the Just Japan podcast. And after our long hiatus, he is back. He was on an episode of the Just Asia podcast, a 30-episode or so podcast that I was putting out for a while before I decided to bring the Just Japan podcast back. And we had a fantastic conversation just the other night all about his children going through the entire Japanese school system. When he first moved back to Japan, his children were 5 and 3 years old. Now his oldest is in university and has gone through the entire Japanese public school system, now in Japanese university. His daughter is almost finished with the public school system, and he kind of reflects upon that experience, and we talk about a lot of different things, but mostly about that educational piece, and we have a very fascinating conversation. So sit back and enjoy my conversation with Brian Waters, a.k.a. My2Yen. All right, guys, we're back for another episode of the Just Japan podcast, and you know what? He's back. If you're a fan of the Just Japan podcast, you might remember him from back in the day. He also appeared on an episode of the Just Asia podcast, which wasn't that far back in the day. Welcome back to the podcast, Brian Waters, My2Yen. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me back. It's great to be back. I always love to be on.
Awesome. And so if you folks have been listening for a long time, back in the day, before the hiatus, the dark hiatus, the long winter, you'll remember Brian from a lot of different episodes, and he's back again. But you know what? There are definitely people who are relatively new to the Just Japan podcast and may not know who you are. Brian, I was wondering if you could give the listeners a little introduction about who you are, where you're from, and where you are now.
Sure thing. I'm originally from the United States. I'm from North Carolina, and I'm half Japanese, so I've always been interested in Japan. And then when I was in college, I got a chance to study Japanese in Nagoya University. And then after graduating from NC State, I went on the JET program for 2 years. So it was an ALT right here in Fukuoka. And then after 2 years of the JET program, I went back to the United States. I got my master's degree in criminalistics, or forensic science, as some people know it. And I worked for the Los Angeles County Coroner's Office in Los Angeles for almost 8 years. And then I got a job offer to come to Japan to work as a professor. And so now I'm a senior assistant professor at the forensic medicine department at Fukuoka University.
Wow, that's very cool.
And during that time, we've talked about it over and over, but yeah. I'm married a Japanese woman. We have 2 kids who are 3/4 Japanese because I'm half, and raising them and building a house and doing all that kind of stuff. So in a nutshell, that's a story of me.
We're on one of the original episodes of the Just Japan podcast back in the day, talking about your work. And then of course, Brian was on several other episodes talking about buying a house, about kids, raising a family. And that's kind of what we're going to reflect back or kind of look back on, because that's over the course of many years. The Just Japan podcast came out more than 10 years ago. And you were on some of those kind of earlier episodes. So what I'm wondering, it's, again, you're an American. you grew up in the United States, and you came to Japan, like you said, to study Japanese. You're on the JET program, but when we first talked years ago, you weren't that long back in Japan, and your kids weren't that old. So what I'm curious to know about now is, your kids are a lot older now. So I guess when we talked before about parenting, your kids were quite young. What big question? What has changed?
Yeah, so many things have changed.
Yeah.
When we first moved back to Japan from the United States, we were living in California, and my kids were 5 and 3. Okay, and then we probably talked about Japanese schooling and raising kids in Japan a few times as they were getting a little bit older.
Yeah, we did.
And now, if you can believe it, my son is almost 19 and a freshman in college, and my daughter is 16 and a second year high school student. So things are very different. And just to give a refresh for those who maybe haven't listened to that first time that we were talking, I could not have been more glowing and complimentary towards the Japanese school system when my kids were both in elementary school. And when my son was 5 and my daughter were 3, we moved back, and they both were in they were both at the same Hoikuen, which is like a preschool and combination kindergarten, right before the kids will start first grade.
Yeah. No, that's I would have left Japan when my kids were just probably, they each would have been a year older than that. My kids were like 6 and 4 when we left Japan and moved to China. So my son would have gone through 3 years at a private Japanese kindergarten, a Yochien, and then he had just finished his first term as Ichinensei at the local shogako, the local public school, and my daughter had done 1 year, or like part of her first year of Japanese kindergarten, because usually Japanese kindergartens are 3 years, and then we left, and I know that. When I talked to a lot of my contemporaries who had kids who were young, I mean, they had nothing but amazing things to say about that, the kindergarten environment. And I agree, like, it was a fantastic experience for my kids. And then he only did like a bite-sized piece of the first year. So yeah, I do remember you sharing very glowing things about that early age and what it was like in elementary school. But I mean, they've gotten older, and your son has gone through the entire system. But I often hear lots of different things. My wife is Japanese, and one thing that she often talks about is like the stress and the pressure that are on kids. One of my best friends, Sarah Matsumoto, who's an old colleague from Japan, and she's been we co-host another podcast together that's about like a little geolocation game, very niche. But her son just got into high school, and he went through the whole process of having to like write tests and have interviews for all these different private high schools and public high schools, and it was just it seemed like such a horribly stressful experience in many ways for her and for him and for her husband and the whole family. So as they got older, let's talk about, secondary life. What was that like for your kids and for your family?
Right. So right up until, all throughout elementary school, everything was like fine and dandy. And, I think we've talked about this. I loved the structure and, how the kids, the kids are really encouraged to be, outgoing and ask questions, and they really learn the basics very well. And it's easy to do that in Japan because everything's so homogenous and standardized and all that kind of stuff. And then when my son got into middle school or junior high, that's when things start to change. The whole tenor of everything changes, and they really buckle down and start really preparing these kids for test taking. And, I thought maybe because, I'm American and I'm from a different system, and I talk to my kids differently and tell them to, talk about prioritizing different things, that would somehow mitigate any kind of, pressure that they would feel about, scoring well on tests or, getting good grades or anything like that. Of course, we want them to do well and get good grades, but, the stress that it seems like students are put in here in Japan can be on another level. Yeah. And my experience is that it doesn't matter how much you say, look, as long as you're trying hard and doing your best, then it's okay. The pressure doesn't it's not coming from us. It's not coming from the parents. I mean, sometimes I'm sure it is, but it's coming from within. It's coming from within the system. Like, kids are starting to be ranked, and, the rankings will start, and then like who's going to be going to the good high schools and who's going to be going to the middle high schools and stuff like that. So kids, the pressure starts to come from other places, like from teachers or from the school, from the system itself, or even from within themselves. Like, for example, my son, who is like, he's very smart and he's very hard on himself. Like, even when he was going through like swimming and all that kind of stuff, he always puts a lot of pressure on himself to be successful.
Okay.
And so, that if there's no, place for that pressure to go, then it could be like really, really stressful. And even without like parents coming in and saying, you have to do well and you have to make A's and you have to do this or do that, which I'm sure happens in some families.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. The pressure can very much well come from within. And that's kind of what happened with him. And a lot of pressure. And he was so like afraid of failing and afraid of not so much like not being like, because I kept telling him, I was like, look, you're going to be fine. You're smart. You work hard. Like, there's nothing to worry about, even if you don't make it into this school or whatever. But that doesn't help, especially if he's got such a narrow vision for where he wants to go. Mm. So saying all that, the good thing, the lucky part of all of this is that he was successful. And so he did get into the schools that he wanted to get into.
Okay.
And so it turned out to be fine. Mm-hmm. And now he's enjoying his life and kind of enjoying the spoils of working so hard in middle school and in
that's that interesting. I was going to say that's that interesting part. I mean, you're just saying he's enjoying the spoils, and I mean, he got into the school he wanted to. But I've also heard from many places, I have friends who work in the university system in Japan who are like instructors and lecturers, and it's kind of a bit of a different, compared to, say, I can only speak for Canada because I went to university in Canada, but they always say that it's easy to get into a good university. It's pretty easy to get into university in Canada, at least when I was, younger, but finishing it or staying in it or doing really well once you're in university, that's a whole different story. Like, we used to always joke around how, like, my freshman year, we had call them the Christmas graduates, that, you'd be in a class with like 100 people the first semester, and by January, when you come back after that holiday break, you'd only have like maybe 70 people or 65. And you're like, where the hell is everyone? Oh, they all flunked out. Like, really? And a lot of them drank themselves out of school. Like, they flunked out because of all the partying, right? Not being able to manage themselves and just like being away from home for the first time. They're like, but in Japan, it's often the hardest part is the getting into university. Once you're in there, hey, maybe it's not like that at all schools, but I kind of I've heard the kind of anecdotes before. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's very true. I think it's a stereotype, but I think it really comes from somewhere. And, of course, every situation is different, and we have to kind of say this, but like I said, it's not like his mother and I were like on him about getting into a certain school or getting into a certain
pressure was from
university or
within,
whatever.
right? From the system.
Right. From the system or just from his own personality. Like just some, like, here's a contrast. Like my daughter, she doesn't care about all of that kind of stuff. She's just like, she's enjoying her high school life, and she's a second year student now. So it's getting to the point where, okay, you have to start thinking about what you're going to do after high school, you know?
Yeah.
But she's just enjoying, she's on the tennis team. She enjoys time, you know, with her friends and stuff like that. So like, it's not with every student, and it's not with every, you know, it's dependent on a number of things. Like they went to different high schools, so the high school culture is different. And also their personalities are very different.
Yeah.
And so it wasn't like with our son, it was like we never had to tell him to study because he was already studying anyway.
Yeah.
Right. But for my daughter, it's like getting her to study is like pulling teeth. It's like, all right, like, don't you have homework? Like, isn't there a test coming up? Come on, can you just at least crack a book?
Yeah, no, I mean, that's one of the interesting things. I mean, you know, that I'm, you know, we were at one point in life on the path where, you know, I would have been having the same experience with both of my kids. You know, they would be going through the Japanese school system, and I would be, as a Canadian father, fumbling through as a parent, trying to support them because I don't really understand what's going on. I don't understand the school system. I didn't go through that system. I also don't have the language ability to be able to support them, even if, like, you know, my Japanese had reached a kind of decent, moderate level of conversational competency. You know, I wouldn't be able to support them with the work they were doing or the reading they were doing. But, you know, so now here we are in an international setting. And that's one thing I've learned, is that every school is very different. You know, this is my fourth school in my career I've been at. And one thing that I've learned is that some schools are far more rigorous than others, even in the international world. And some schools have far higher expectations for students, and just the curriculum. And then therefore often the teachers as well. You know, there's, I mean, I've worked at my last school had far more rigor, I should say, than my current school. And my current school isn't bad at all, but the last school, it was just what I was a kindergarten teacher, and I was teaching, you know, kids who are American kindergarten age, and they were expected by the end of kindergarten to be able to write paragraphs. You know, it was just because that was curriculum. You know, so it's whereas in others, my previous school to that in kindergarten, like my daughter went to, like when they finished kindergarten, they could write their name and they could write the numbers to 30. You know. So it's just like, wow, you know, they're all different. So one thing, I sent you a few talking points before we jumped on here. And one thing I'm curious about is, as a parent looking over, you know, looking at your kids and their experience and maybe their friends' experiences and others, you know, what is the difference between the kind of social experiences that kids have? And again, I know you're not a guru in this or anything. I'm just asking a dad. But, you know, like, I think of when I was in high school, we had dances and we'd spend a lot of time hanging out with our friends. And I have this kind of stereotypical image of Japanese secondary students, especially, you know, heading towards high school or heading towards university, of just having to work, no life, no social life, no time for that stuff, study. Am I completely wrong with that, or?
No, I don't think you're wrong about that. I do think there is that segment of, you know, the school population. You've got the students who, they have a one-track mind, they know where they want to go, and they're not going to let anything stop them from doing that. And I would put my son definitely in that category. And so in terms of like social activities or outside of school activities, you know, he was a competitive swimmer. So he was on a swim team, and he did the early morning practices, and, you know, I don't know, maybe like a dozen times during the year, he would be, you know, at a swim meet somewhere on a weekend.
Okay.
And so that takes a considerable amount of time. And also because of that, you make friends just, being a teammate and, being on a team and all that kind of stuff. And then, occasionally they would, they would go out to yakiniku or to karaoke or whatever, just a few of the teammates or what have you. And so they're getting they're getting some kind of social interaction that way. But there were times where, he was just like, no, I can't do this or I can't do that because I have to study and I'm running out of time and I need more time to study and all this kind of stuff. And he would really it would get in his head that he just didn't have enough time to study in order to be prepared for the test that he was going to take. Again, a contrast to my daughter, and these are both no international schools or anything like that. They're both in the Japanese public school system, no private schools either. So just to contrast, she, I'm not saying she's a complete, she doesn't study at all. She studies when she knows she has to, but she prioritizes, her time with her friends and she gets a lot of social interaction through, her tennis. She plays tennis, so her tennis team and all that kind of stuff. And then friends from her class or friends from the tennis team, and they go out and they do stuff, go shopping, go to the mall, just like any, high school student that you would picture in any country. So there are those two kind of contrasts. But I do say that I would say that the pressures that are put on a Japanese high school student who wants to get into the best schools and, be known for their academic excellence, it is severe, and there's the stereotype is there for a reason, I would say. Yeah.
I like the term severe, because that's, one of the interesting things that you mentioned with the rankings and the pressure. I've been a teacher in Korea and China as well. And these are three education systems that to a certain degree have some similarities. And one of those being kind of that academic rigor or that academic severity for those who want to do well. And I think it would have been probably a lot more extreme in China and Korea than Japan at the moment. It's interesting. A lot of my Chinese colleagues, when I was living there, teaching assistants and stuff, would say how they would literally, when you were in secondary school, when you would write tests, the scores, the rankings would be posted on paper outside the gates of the school for all, not just students, but family members, the general public, for everyone to see with your name and the ranking beside it. So basically the whole world knew where you stood in that school. And that could be maybe potentially a good thing for some of those who are kind of shining, but utterly humiliating and defeating for those out there who maybe weren't as strong academically. And I remember being horrified hearing those tales. I'm like, oh my God, really? That's horrible. Because I would have been one of those ones who would have been I would have walked into the gates of school with the public pointing at me going, you're in the bottom 10%, Kevin, because I was at some points in my academic career, I think. But yeah, it's and I know in Korea, the pressure put on kids, especially in high school, to get into university is insane by a lot of parents, because it's basically the idea of the honor of the family is you are representing the family. And if you don't get into that great school, you're kind of shaming the family. Obviously those are kind of the more extreme cases, but I can remember when they would have the university entrance tests in Korea, and there was a big public high school near the English Hagwon, the English school I worked at, and I'd see the parents outside praying and stuff on that day, all day long with like candles and stuff and praying while their children were inside writing the tests. Just oh my God, wow,
yeah,
very next level. But yeah, I suppose, yeah. I'm just curious. It's interesting because now, even my own kids, we're in an international school setting, and their life is really different than it would have been if they were growing up in Canada in a neighborhood. Because where you grew up in, was it North Carolina? Am I right?
That's right. Yeah.
You probably went to the elementary school in your neighborhood, and then you went to high school in your neighborhood. So you were kind of around those kids that you were always with, and you could go and hang out with them after school or ride your bicycle over to their place or all get together. Whereas in here at an international school, or anywhere else I've worked, like my kids' classmates are spread all over a city. Because they're coming from all these different parts of a city to the school. They don't have really many classmates in the neighborhood at all. And when they're young, like you're not just going to go let them hop on a city bus and go, or at least not here, you wouldn't hop on a city bus and go somewhere. It's not that safe. Japan luckily has that aspect. I think my kids didn't have the opportunity, even though they're not in Japan, to see friends and play with friends as freely as definitely as I did when I was a kid. Yeah. So it's
absolutely. That's so true. And that starts because the junior high that's near our house, all the kids that go there are from this area. But then as soon as you start breaking up for high school, kids are trying to get into, whatever the best schools that they can get into wherever they are, right? The best public schools, in this area, my son had to bike to the train station and then take a train up, and then from the train station that he got to, he has to walk 15 minutes and all that kind of stuff. So that's just something that you have to do. And there were very few of his really good friends from middle school that went to the same high school as he did. And so, it's something that I guess people are just used to, like kind of saying goodbye to their friends or, making new friends or what have you. Yeah. So that's something that's very different from the way that we grew up. I went to the public high school in my town, and 2,000 kids that I've seen year after year since I was an elementary school student.
Yeah, that's people here. A lot of people I've worked with over the years here in the various countries in Asia are just always like really kind of shocked with like when I talk about like how we didn't have choices. Like I grew up in a little town called Lewisburg, so we went to Lewisburg Elementary School, and then we went to junior high school at what was it called, George H. Lewis Junior High School, where everyone went. But our town was too small to have a high school, so we had a county high school where all the kids from all the small towns went to, and that had about 1,500 kids. But that's just where you went. Right. There was no choice. There was no other option. I want to go to that high school or this one. No, you all go to Riverview High School. Why was it called Riverview High School? Because it was along a river, and you could see the river, hence the Riverview. There it was. But like even like I'm just thinking right now what you were mentioning about your son with his high school. My wife tells me sometimes like just one of her old like we were in Kobe. We were based in Kobe. My wife is from Osaka, but we lived in Kobe my whole time in Japan. And she had like a friend in our neighborhood in Kobe. When her son got to secondary school, she wanted he got into a really nice private school in Kyoto, and for his entire secondary career, middle school and high school, he commuted every single day by himself from Kobe to Kyoto. And that's a freaking crazy haul. And he would go there in the morning and go to school all day and then come back for like 6 years. And it was like, that's like 3 hours a day on the train or more, 4 hours a day on the train. Like that's insane. But
yeah,
that's wow.
Yeah, that's, something I was talking about public schools, and public schools, you have to kind of stay within a certain area where you live for public schools here in Japan. But private schools, you can go anywhere. You can go to another prefecture. I mean, I know there are people who live up in this area of Fukuoka where I live, which is just south of the city, and in order to go to a really nice private high school that's just down south in the prefecture, I mean, they have to travel, like you said, hours on a train just to get there, and hours back, to get home. And so, it's people do that stuff, or they'll actually like move to a dorm or something on the private school's campus or something like that.
Yeah.
Well, I guess that exists in America too, but, it's just not something. Yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting. Now, I'm curious. So now your son is in university. So I mean, these are questions. An inquiring mind wants to know because I mean, my kids probably definitely won't go to school. Won't go to university in Japan. At least maybe not in the kind of traditional sense. Maybe they would in the future if there was some kind of English language program or international program that tickled their fancy, so to speak. But both of my kids, although they still study Japanese, they're not at a level where they could ever possibly get into a Japanese university and study in the Japanese language. Like they just don't have that. Um, so, obviously when we're looking at universities, when I was a pretty unmotivated high school student, old Kevin here. I reformed as I got older, but I mean, I was like, I have no idea what I want to do. My dad's like, you're going to university. I'm like, well, I don't know what I want to do. He's like, well, you're going to university. I'm like, well, what do I do then? You'll get a Bachelor of Arts. Okay. And then I ended up getting like a BA, and I kind of found my path once I got into school. But like my first year was just kind of a general Bachelor of Arts degree where you take on of all the survey courses and kind of figure out like maybe which direction you want to go in. So how did it work for your kids? Like obviously your son seems like he had the eye on the prize. He kind of knew what he wanted. How did that work?
Mm-hmm.
And your daughter, who, like you said, will work when need be, but maybe her eye isn't quite as focused on the prize as your son. What would the process of like hunting for a university or focusing on a university be? What was that like for them, or for your son anyway?
Yeah, this is quite different from the U.S. and Canada, I'm sure, but they start to put you down a path pretty early in your academic career here in Japan. Okay. So when you enter high school, so your first year of high school, you kind of have to decide whether you're going to go down a science track or down science or math track or down like a liberal arts track.
Okay.
And so, yeah, so it's based on a lot of things, your interests and also your grades and how you did in certain subjects in middle school. And it even goes to like the test that you would take to get into a high school. Like, for example, obviously the high school that my son went to was very competitive, and yet there are people that are really good in math and science, and there are people that are good in the in Japanese and Japanese literature and those kind of subjects as well. So they'll start kind of focusing. I mean, of course, there's a good, well-rounded education in elementary and in junior high in Japan, but then whichever you have the most interest in or the most like the better grades in, you'll start kind of going down that track. So when my son was taking the test for his high school, it was a test that was to get into the science and math track at his high school.
Okay.
And so the test is different. The entrance exam is different. And also while he's in school, if he's like, oh yeah, well, I don't like science, I think I'm going to switch. That's not really something that you do. Like once you're in that track, you kind of have to just grin and bear it.
Okay.
Even if you don't feel like you're doing that well. And then obviously, if you're on a science track in high school, then you have to just ride that track on into university as well. So, and then it gets even more and more specialized. So he's studying mechanical engineering, and so, but while he was going to cram school to get into university, he was focusing on different types of tests for different majors, like medical school or for this kind of engineering or that kind of engineering. And then basically after you've gone to cram school for a year and the teachers know what your strengths and weaknesses are and what the scores are on all your different tests, then you can say, okay, this is the best chance for me to get into this school. Wow. And so that's what I'm going to focus on. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, that is really different, right?
Yeah. Wow. So so for example, you take I think we talked about this maybe on a previous thing, but he had to take two exams, two university entrance exams. One is the standardized test that all students that are going to go into university take.
Okay.
But it's a different test based on what you want to study. So, for example, he had to take English, Japanese, chemistry, and physics and math. Okay, those are the 5 subjects. So it was over 2 days he had to take all these tests. It was like, it's crazy.
Sounds quite nightmarish.
Yeah, it's called the center test, right? So based on the score of his center test, then that kind of tells you, okay, your score is good enough to where that you probably won't be able to get into. You can definitely get into this university, but this university is going to be tough, and then this university is kind of out of the question or whatever. Wow. And so, like, just for argument's sake, we'll say Tokyo University is the hardest school to get into in Japan. So we'll just say, yeah, you're out of reach for that one. And then let's say Kyoto University, which is a very difficult school to get into. You're kind of on the fence with that one. And then like Kyushu University is the best university around here in this area. Mm-hmm. You probably can get into that one if you do well. And then each of those schools have their own entrance exam. So separate from the center test, right? So, so based on the center test results, then you choose, okay, because the tests kind of add together. It depends on the university's, scoring system, but you can take some of the points that you got from your center test and add them to your entrance exam.
So different, right? I mean, even like the Canadian American systems are so different. Like we didn't have the SATs. We didn't have any kind of standardized testing in Canada. Like it was all university entrance was all based on your grades. It was based on your kind of resume, anything you've done, volunteer work, this and that. But it was primarily your grades. And sometimes you'd have to write an essay. I'm sure I didn't apply for sciences. I wasn't applying to get into engineering or anything that would be math heavy or anything like that. So, but maybe if you don't have to, and you'd go into those courses and they weed you out pretty quickly. But even like, I had my Bachelor of Arts degree, which is 4 years. And then I had to go to get my Bachelor of Education, which is 2 more years. That's how you become a licensed teacher in Canada. And I applied to 10 schools for that, 10 universities. And because the way it works is it doesn't matter the name cachet, I guess, isn't there so much in Canada. They don't, people don't care what university you went to get the degree, as long as you have the degree, because that's what I need to get my teaching license. And then once you have your license, and boom, boom, boom. It doesn't matter. So I applied to a whole bunch of schools and got into a whole bunch of them, but I went to the one that was nearest my mom and dad because I hadn't seen them in years. I'm like, I want to be near mom and dad. I go see them on weekends sometimes. Right. And it was my grades for my undergrad. Literally, it was the grades for my undergrad, and then I think I had to write for several of them. I had to write an essay, why I want to be a teacher or something, like that. I was like, when I grow up, I want to help kids, come to succeed and realize their full potential. You know what I mean. But it was very different. Right. That wasn't as rigorous. Now, mind you, you had to have a minimum GPA even to apply, and then obviously the higher the GPA, better chance you have of getting in there, right? But again, it wasn't as maybe so stressful. Yeah. Wow.
Yeah, I mean, it was similar for us in America. Obviously, we have the SAT, which is a standardized test. It's the same for every high school student who wants to go to university, and that's broken into 2 major sections: the math and the verbal. And then so a lot of universities at that time had cutoffs, for if you don't make this minimum level on the SAT, then you don't even bother applying, that type of thing. And so it was kind of the same for me in terms of I had a few different schools in my head I had a safe school, backup school, and then I had kind of like, this might be just barely out of reach, and then like a dream school, And so I just happened to get before all of, before I had to go through all that rigmarole, I just happened to be lucky enough to get a scholarship to the school that was going to be my safe school. But and so that made the decision for me, because my dad was like, oh,
especially in the United States, with the price of tuition, right?
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
So, but yeah. So the Japanese system is really, really different and crazy, because you only got this one center test that's basically the linchpin that's going to make the difference of whether you go to Tokyo University, or have to settle for a small university like in your town or whatever. And then, of course, private universities are kind of a backup, but a lot of times you don't have enough time to take all of these entrance exams, because they're all different and they're all kind of spread out in that period between January and March. And so like, for example, a lot of those entrance exams for, like, say, national schools, national universities, are on the same day. So you can't take an entrance exam for Kyushu University and for Saga University, because they're on the same day. So you have to choose one or the other. And then maybe you have a private university as your backup, but what if you don't get into either of them? Well, then you're just out of luck, and you have to sit out a year.
Yeah.
And then a lot of people go to what's called a Yobiko, which is kind of like a cram school for students who didn't get into the
and then they rinse and repeat, and they do it all again the following year and hope they get a better result, right?
Exactly. And I work at a medical school, and I've every time I have these like little conversation classes with them, and sometimes I'm just asking them, like, so how old are you? And they'll a lot of times they're like, oh, I'm 20 or I'm 22 or whatever, medical school students. And then occasionally I'll get, oh, I'm 28, or I'm like, oh, what did you do before medical school? And they're like, I was just studying to get into medical school. I was like, wait, you were just studying to get into medical school for 10 years? And they're like, yeah. And I finally got in.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah. I mean, some of these kids, it's usually like kids who are the children of doctors, and who want their children to go to medical school as well.
Okay.
And so it's like, it doesn't matter how long.
Maybe they didn't want to so much, but come hell or high water, they're going to. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
I don't know if I admire their tenacity, or I'm fearful of those efforts. I'm curious. I don't want to keep you too much longer here, because it's a work night. You're a bit ahead of me in time, but I'm curious, like, as a parent looking back at kind of, your son's finished the kind of public school system now, and your daughter's in it, but kind of coming towards the end part of it. What are some things I'm just curious about? Like, once it seems like from what you've said and from what we've said in previous podcasts, that the kind of primary side of things, kindergarten, the primary school, was quite a nice experience, and I hear that time and time again from so many parents and students. What were some of the frustrations that you felt as a parent, kind of looking in, watching your kids go through that school experience? Was there any things that just like really pissed you off or frustrated you or wish was different? Because, we all as parents hate seeing our kids unhappy, right? Unless it's us making them unhappy, and then they deserve it. No, but I mean, we do. We hate seeing that. We don't want to see our kids stressed or unhappy. So I am curious. Yeah, what were some of the bigger kind of points for you that may have caused a bit of anxiety for you?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I mean, we don't want to. I definitely didn't want to see my kids unhappy or not enjoying their life. I mean, when they're kids, they should be happy. They shouldn't be fearful or stressed out. That they're going to have plenty of time for that when they start working. But yeah, so yeah, I was definitely frustrated at times, but I realized that, look, this is kind of the way it is, and there's not really a lot that you can do, and you certainly can't change things like on a dime. And so, I guess if things got so bad that, like, for example, if my son was just having a miserable time every day and maybe crying or something like that, we could have pulled him out and put him into, a private school or something that's a little bit less stressful. But like I said, a lot of the pressure that he was feeling was coming, from his own desire to be successful and to, be near the top of the rankings or what have you. And so that kind of stuff is like really hard to mitigate, from where I stand, because you can assure him all that you want, but if it's going to be up to him to either feel that or not, to see. Like, so even when he was like taking these.
I was just going to say, the only thing I can think of is, like, for example, I can think of, like, in the past in life when maybe I'm at a point in my career, or when I worked at a school where I wasn't, maybe, when I was working in Japan, financially life was hard often. I didn't make a lot of money, and it was sometimes a bit of a struggle, and I'd have sleepless nights and so much stress, and I couldn't get over the stress of the money. And then you have people like, oh, it's okay, Kevin, don't worry about it. You'll get through it, buddy. Or it's okay. Just next month will be better. You might hear all those encouraging words, but for me, it was just like, no. And then I lay and stare at the ceiling all night long. It was eating me up inside. And even though maybe not the end of the world, it was like me doing that, right? So maybe the same thing with your son. I was putting all this pressure on myself and the stress. And no matter how encouraging the words were coming from my mom or my dad or my wife or friends, it was just like, ah.
Yes, exactly. They can't see what you, especially, when you're, it's probably different when you're talking about friends or colleagues or something like that. But when you're looking at your own children, and, you've gone through, a form of what they've gone through in terms of, going through school and, having ups and downs and that kind of thing. And then you realize, and you want to communicate to them, look, it's okay. It's not the end of the world if you don't get into this school, or if you do bad on this test or whatever. You're smart. I can see that. You work hard. We can all see that.
Yeah.
And you're going to be fine. But they can't see that at that time, for whatever reason.
Especially
so,
right? When you're, when you throw in that, just, there's the whole, lack of experience in life because they're young and they're going through this, and hormones and all of those things, which make everything crazy anyway, even on a good day. And I suppose that's the point where we all learn these things, right? And often, what do you say? It's often it's better to learn by doing, right? The hardest lesson, or the best lessons, are the ones we go through ourselves, right? Yeah. That's
exactly. So my only kind of so those times are definitely frustrating when you're watching your kids like have a hard time and self-doubt and all that kind of stuff. But if I had to give some advice to some parents who will be going through this, or maybe are going through it now, just be there, listen. Don't try to solve everything for your kids, because first of all, 9 times out of 10, even despite your best efforts, you're not going to solve anything for them. You're just going to make it worse. Or, so the best advice is just kind of, be there, experience this time with them, and just reassure them that you're there and you support them and you're going to love them, no matter what happens. And then, luckily things worked out for my son, but, even if, he didn't get into these schools that he wanted to get into or whatever, I'm sure it would be fine. He would just, adjust. And that's a great thing about being that age and being young and starting out in your career, is that you have so many different paths and so many different opportunities. They can't see it. They have this, tunnel vision. But with those of us with experience who have pivoted and who have adjusted and have gone down so many different paths, I mean, you can relate to this too, Kevin. Things work out, and even if they don't, you pivot and you make the best of it. And that's kind of thinking I want to kind of teach my children, that they can pivot and adjust, and everything will be fine.
Yeah, that's one of the interesting things now too. I think more so than any time in the past, some of the positive takeaways we take from the whole kind of age of COVID and stuff with a lot of education is so much stuff has gone online. Stuff was going online before, but now so many more things are going online, especially with like professional development. And what's really interesting now is we see even people who are older, who are like me, or, people in their 30s and 40s and 50s, they're making pivots in their careers. And I mean, how many teachers have I met during the COVID years who are just like, I'm done with this crap. And they're just like, you know what, 20 years in, screw it. And then they pivoted and they went into something else, and they learned online how to become a programmer, or they learned how to do this or that, and they've gone on to new careers. And that's pivoting is probably potentially easier now than it ever was before, because we have so many new ways of acquiring new skills. And once our perspective changes and we realize, once that kind of, we get older and have more experience, that tunnel vision maybe widens more. We're like, oh, wait a second. There's a lot more out here maybe I could do, right?
That's right. Also, one thing I also realize, and I try to communicate with my kids, is like, everything that you do, like even if you don't succeed at it, or maybe you put a lot of time in it and then it just doesn't work out, all of that stuff, all that experience and all that knowledge and all those ups and downs, that kind of stuff, like, it helps you and it adds to, the kind of person that you are. And so, like, for example, my son, when he was frustrated about not having enough time to study for these entrance exams and stuff, he was saying like, oh, I should have never done swimming, because that took too much time and effort. I could have used that time to study more or whatever. And I'm like, son, all the swimming, all that experience doing swimming. And first of all, you're extremely physically fit, and that's going to just help you, so much in the future. And then like all those experiences, even the winning and the losing and, having teammates and friends, that stuff is, that's part of you. That's part of who you are as a person. It's just so important, right?
Yeah, and when they're at that age, maybe they don't, they're not old enough to really reflect upon that. But the stuff they learn by working as part of a team, which they will when they're with companies in the future, the tenacity of not giving up, all those early mornings, the hard work, to get out of bed early in the morning and go do something maybe you don't want to do, and then. So there's so many incredible life lessons from playing sports like that and doing things like that, right? That will carry on and make them more successful. And as I say too, like when they talk about like successful business owners and CEOs, the people who are like millionaires who own these big successful companies usually have a trail of broken, unsuccessful companies behind them. That they failed time and time again. And they often, when you hear interviews with people who are successful business people, they often say they learned from every failure and they took those lessons and moved forward, and that's why they are where they are, which is very interesting. Yeah.
Master Yoda said, the greatest teacher failure is, right? Coming straight from the master's mouth.
Straight from the master. Yes, you know what, Brian, I don't want to keep it too much longer. Also, I've the Just Japan podcast studio has a shower room where I think my son probably wants to use soon. He's been cool to not come in and interrupt. But yeah, so I'm wondering well, I know where people can find you, but where can tell people, where can they find you online if they want to take part in your musings and your views on Japan?
Yeah, you can find me on X at My2Yen, or on Twitter, as those of us old school Twitter folks like to call it.
I like it, Twitter still, yeah.
Yeah. So, please tweet at me. And I haven't been so active recently, but every day I'm retweeting or perusing and stuff like that. Even if I'm not, sending out original tweets and stuff, it's still the place that I'm the most active, I'd say.
Cool. So on Twitter or X for some of you, at my2yen, and I'll put that link in the show notes. Brian, thanks so much for stopping by the podcast yet again. It's great to have you back.
Always a pleasure. Thanks for having me again.
All right. I want to thank Brian for coming on another episode of the Just Japan podcast. And it was fantastic talking to him. It always is. Brian, thank you so much. And of course, you can follow him on Twitter, on X, at my2yen. So go check that out. Do it now. All right, guys. So I'm on a summer holiday. I'll be recording a few more episodes of this podcast in the next week or so. They'll be coming out regularly, and I'm looking forward to having you guys get some regular content. Of course, go check on YouTube. I've started posting episodes of the podcast on YouTube and for you guys to enjoy. Sometimes with the video version, it may actually just be the interview portion, not the intro and outro bumper little bits. But I definitely see that a lot of people enjoy consuming this content on YouTube. So there it is. Yeah. Also, please come over to the Facebook page. There's a lot of action over there. I post a lot of things on the Facebook page that are nowhere else. That's facebook.com/justjapanstuff. Facebook.com/justjapanstuff. A link will be in the show notes. So I do post a lot of photos, videos of kind of what's going on right now with me here, kind of current things where I'm at in Malaysia, videos from the archives, photos from Japan, photos from here, photos from all over the place, a lot of stuff, but that's the only place where I put it. So go and join that amazing community. Follow me on Twitter at MadForMaple, on Instagram. A few places go on Instagram. I'll put a few links in the show notes at JLandKev and at Japan Night Scenes. Go follow those two accounts. That's where I am the most active. Wow, guys. Yeah, so it's summer here in Malaysia. It's hot, but it's not as hot as it is in Japan. When we talk to family in Japan, it's hot there. And friends in Japan, it's really hot there. So it's really fascinating to see that it's hotter in Tokyo and Osaka and Kyoto than it is in Malaysia. Pretty wild, right? That is pretty wild. So unfortunately, we're not able to travel to Japan this summer or Canada this summer. We are here in Malaysia. And hopefully, if all goes to plan, we will be in Osaka for the winter break, our winter holiday for Christmas and New Year's. If all goes to plan, hopefully those crazy prices, well, I'm sure they won't, but the crazy prices on accommodations will drop, I would hope. Obviously, the yen isn't the strongest, so people who run Airbnbs have jacked prices up the wazoo. It's absolutely insane how much Airbnbs are. And since my wife's parents live in a very small apartment, we can't bunk with them. We need an Airbnb. And right now the prices are pretty outrageous. So hopefully we'll be able to sort something out by that point. So yeah, guys, that is it. Again, I'm going to make sure I start vlogging a little bit more on YouTube, hopefully. And also I do over on that Facebook page I had mentioned earlier, I do post content only to there. Sometimes I'll do live streams and then I just post videos on that platform as well, because that's where a lot of the kind of diehard supporters of the podcast are. And speaking of supporting the podcast, guys, I ask you to help the show grow by shouting the podcast out on social media, wherever you are. If you love the Just Japan podcast, even if you just like us mildly, just tepidly, please share links that I share. If you're a Twitter person, please repost the links to the podcast. If you come across us on Instagram, please share. If you're on Facebook and you see, please share on your Facebook. Help grow. Post episode links and kind of Japan related Facebook pages or groups that you may be involved in and get more people listening to the podcast. Definitely appreciate that. That's how you can support us, help us grow, shout us out, and of course leave a great rating and review on Apple Podcasts or Amazon Music, Spotify, wherever you listen to us. All right, guys, well, that's it. Episode 221 of the Just Japan podcast is finito. Owari. That's it. We're done. And I'll be back very soon. Got a lot of great guests coming up in the near future. I've got like 2 interviews lined up already next week. I'm going to be doing, and that's so cool. So that's it, guys. Take care. Have yourself a great summer wherever you are, whether you're on holiday, whether you're not on holiday, if you're working, just wherever you are. Have a fantastic summer, and I'll be talking to you in less than a month, that's for sure. We'll try coming to you again next week. All right, guys. Well, that's it for episode 221. Wherever you are in the world, I hope you are happy. I hope you are healthy, and I'll be talking to you again very soon.
If you got a minute to spare, don't go anywhere, stay right there, 'cause Kevin is about to speak. Stay in peace on the street.